you? I hope you're alright. For those who don't know me, hi, my name is Clara, and I'm the owner of this channel, The Ink Path, where I talk about books in English and in Spanish. So obviously, you're watching a video in English, and today I want to do a book tag, a very special book tag created by a Spanish booktuber that I really like. She is called Aurora, and she has this channel called the Aurorix. I'll leave you all the links down below to her channel and the original tag. She created this tag called the last year's book tag, and it's a kind of reflection on how you did it during the year and the books that you read during the last year. So because I didn't do any kind of best books of the year video yet, I have decided to actually sit down and do the tag. She tagged me in the original video. As I said before, I leave it down below. But I wanted to bring it to the channel, and as you know, every video that I do in Spanish, I try to do it as well in English. So the translation of the questions are actually my own. So I'm hoping I'm doing this right. The first question is, how many books have you read? In total, last year I read 58 books. I'm checking with Goodreads. I'm looking at Goodreads because it's what I use normally to track my reading, but if you use a notebook or another app, you can actually check your information or your reading information with that. As I was saying originally, last year my reading goal was to reach 30 books, but that's something I did before March. So I decided to actually try to read more books. So I decided to change the goal to 50 books. And in the end, I read 58 books. The first and the last book of your year, which is your first book and last book of the year. Enchanted by Gita Release was the first book I read. You have a review on the channel. I will try to put a kind of link to it on the screen, but if I cannot, check on the channel and you will see it. And the last book, it was Tú también puedes volar, a Spanish book written by Cristina Martín de Francisco, which review is also on the channel. Actually, it's one of the latest videos that I posted. Third question, best and worst read of the year. I think my best read was actually 1,000 Ships by Natalia Haynes. It's a retelling of the Iliad and the Odyssey, but told from the point of view of the women, and I adore it. I really like it. I'm hoping I'm saying the name of the author right, because I always change it without intending it to. And the worst book for me, in my case, was The Lessons by Naomi Alderman. I love Naomi Alderman's other book called The Power, but this one didn't click for me. It was supposed to be a dark academia book, and I love dark academia books. It's actually my favorite genre at the moment. I read If We Were Villains, and I have kind of 3 books on that topic, or 3 novels about students on that kind of genre, thriller genre, but this one didn't click for me. I wasn't connected to the story. It was very slow. It wasn't actually any mystery at all. I wasn't very fond of it. In fact, I give it 1 star, my lowest rating. Next question. A book that left you kind of indifferent. With this one, I'm going to be very sad about what I'm going to say, but I listened to Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur, who is a poet that I actually really like. I read this last year. Talking about last year, I read first the second poetry collection that she wrote, which is The Sun and Her Flowers, which is one of my favorite poetry collections of all time, and I really like it. I really enjoyed it. It was really good. So when I saw that in my British library they had an audiobook read by the author of the first poetry collection that she published, I thought, okay, here we go. This is the thing. I'm going to love it. And then I started listening to it, and even though the topics were really like good, I did not like the way it was read. I was comparing it to some fragments of the book that I could actually read while I was listening, and I didn't find that the reading pace was correct, that the pauses were correct. It left me a little bit meh. And I'm very sad because I know that what I'm saying is really horrible, because I'm talking about the author, because it's the author reading the book. It was read by Rupi, and I felt a little bit meh about it. The fifth question is actually the shortest and the longest books of your year, of last year. So the shortest book that I've read last year was actually a short story, a Spanish short story written by a Spanish author, and it was De Piel y Arcilla by Marina Tena Tena. This is a retelling of the Pandora's myth, of the, Pandora and the box, and I really like it. I gave it 5 stars. And the longest, the shortest one, the shortest story that I just mentioned, it was 5 pages long. And the longest book I read was actually the complete trilogy, the Northern Lights trilogy by Philip Pullman. I read this while listening to a radio dramatization of the BBC available on my British library. I read this on my Kindle, and it was a bind-up of the 3 books, and it was, let me check, because this was heavy. This was around, let me check, 947 pages. Next question. Okay, a book with a supporting character you believed he, she, or they deserves her own book, her own story. And with this one, I'm going to say Mirabel from the Starless Sea. I love the Starless Sea I discovered last year. It was my first read of the quarantine period, and it was actually very, very hard. I was not very well psychologically. We were okay, we are still okay at my place. All the people that we live in the flat, we are okay and we're safe and we're taking measures, but it was very, very sad and desperating seeing all that on the TV, and it was the book I went to every time I needed to seek for refuge, I needed to escape from the reality, and I adore it. And Mirabel is actually my favorite character, and she's very intriguing and complex character. She's very whimsical. And most read genre, this one was tricky for me in Spanish and in English. That's because during this year I read a variety of books. I read a lot of literary fiction, like adult fiction, and then I read a lot of fantasy. I read middle grade. I read short stories. I read sci-fi. I don't normally read sci-fi, but I read sci-fi. I read a lot of non-fiction and listened to a lot of non-fiction, because I read autobiographies and I read essays. I read a lot of stuff. But I still think that because I love fantasy, fantasy is still my most read genre. Okay, one thing, if you listen to the background, it's because the people I'm living with, they actually have the TV on and they are commenting on the news, because we have a huge storm outside. We have a snowstorm hitting Spain, which is where I live, for the past 2 days, I believe, and this one is hitting really hard. Where I live in Madrid is not normally possible to snow, and we are actually sheltered at home because we cannot go out. It's completely covered in snow, like very, very big. So they are watching the news and checking on the weathercast and everything. So don't worry if you see the background, if you listen some conversation at the background. Next question is, let me check. The eternal book on your TBR, a book you wanted to read last year but actually didn't manage to do. And I'm going to go with the original Grisa trilogy or the complete Grisa-verse stories. I read the first Grisa book on, I think, 2017. Last year I went to a signing with Lee Bardugo before all the pandemic and everything. She was tremendously fun, and she was very nice to me. Actually, for those who don't know, I'm in a wheelchair, so I couldn't reach where she was seated, and she saw me and went down she was placed like in a higher table or something. So she went down to actually hug me, and we were chatting. She signed the book, and it was really nice. By then, I already read the first one, but I couldn't actually read the first one and complete the trilogy, which was my plan. So, nope, that was not actually a thing I managed to do. It still is one of my goals for 2021. Let's see if I manage to do it. Next question. A book you DNF. I don't normally DNF books, but I try to listen to the Confessions by Jessie Burton. Jessie Burton is a British author that I've been meaning to read since she started publishing stuff, but I actually didn't have the opportunity in any of my libraries, not in the Spanish library, not in the British library that I'm part of, to actually pick a book by her. And when I saw that they had in the British library that I'm a member of, that they had audiobook read by Hayley Atwell. For those who don't know, Hayley Atwell is Agent Carter in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who is an actress that I adore and portrays this character that I adore. I said, okay, I'm going to read this book. The book was The Confessions, and is the latest book of Jessie Burton writing career. However, I started it, I last around 5 chapters, and I decided that even though I adore Hayley's work and her voice was very good, it wasn't the kind of book for me, and I DNF it. Next question. The 10th question is a book that enters immediately in your favorite books of your life list. So I have several books I could say they reached this list. For example, 1,000 Ships, which is my favorite book of the year, actually is part of that list. But a book that I don't want to repeat books for questions. So apart from that one, and apart from the Starless Sea, because it saved my first weeks in quarantine, for example, I'm going to say a book that I read recently and I knew I was going to adore, but I wasn't sure about which level, which peak of adoration it was going to reach, and that's The Invisible Library of Addie LaRue by B. Schwab. So when I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which is the book that I read by her last year, well, not last year, officially last year, but in October, I fell in love with it. I knew I was going to like it because I've been following the creation process of Addie for a while, but I didn't know it was going to be that big, and I felt represented in the book, so I like it very much. What else? We are reaching the end, so the 11th question says a book you have to lend, a book that you have read last year that it's compulsory for you to pass on, to lend to friends, to make it more known, to lend it to others to read it. And I'm going to say an oldie from the book community, which is Love Letters to the Dead by Ava Lyra. I read about the Lyra first book, which is this one, last year, and before the pandemic, before everything happened. And I know it's a very, very hard book. It's a very hard YA contemporary book. I think I did a review. If so, I will leave it somewhere on the screen. But when I read it, it was the right moment to read it, because I have some stuff has happened recently in the past few years, and I think that this book hit me very hard, and I felt so many things because of all those events. And even though it's a hard book, it deals with a lot of heavy stuff, and there has a lot of trigger warnings for some people. I find that I would have loved for other people to read it more, or to make it more known. So I would definitely pass it on, lend it to people, to friends and family. Lastly, the last question is a new release from last year that you have yet to read. And for me, that's Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And I know that you're going to tell me, okay, but that's not last year, because it was officially published in 2019. Yep, but we have it, or we receive it in Spanish. We have the official REID in the Spanish version, which is the one I own, around January of 2020. So officially, it's still a new release to me. This is it. This is the tag. I hope you enjoy it. And now I'm going to tell you who I'm going to tag. Of course, if you're watching this and you have a YouTube channel and or a blog place where you talk about books, and you want to do it, you are more than invited to do so. But if you do, don't forget to actually write to me when you publish your video or your post, so I can actually go and see it or read it. And even you, if you don't actually have a place where you talk about books and you want to continue with the tag, you can tell me what would you reply in the comment section down below. I'm officially tagging Sam from Thoughts on Toms and Joel from Fictional Reads. I want to say his booktube channel is called. I found him recently during the quarantine. I found him in March, and I fell in love with his approach to literature and how happy and insightful he is when he talks about books. And I will tag them in the original tweet where I actually announced that I post this. But I hope both of you do it if you fancy to do it. And I don't know, I want to see what your kind of responses or replies to the questions are. Okay, this is it. See you next week. Bye.